Alive. We're here ahead of qualifying for the Dutch Grand Prix. Terry is in the hot seat since Rob is vacationing in Europe, but he sends his regards. Terry, what have you thought of the weekend so far?
It's been one of those really interesting topsy-turvy weekends with, to be honest, not a lot to go on. Let's be honest, there's going to be a few wings and prayers, I think, into this weekend for a lot of people, definitely looking at what we've seen so far.
Yeah, some of the most useless free practice data we've had in a long time. So I think we're just going to have to look back at which teams left at Spa on a good note and probably just ride some of those similar themes going into this week. I figure perhaps we can start with, since the free practice data isn't very useful, maybe we can look at some of the sims, since those are most predictive of how we're looking this week. And for the first time in recent memory, at least months, Red Bull are not at the top of the qualifying sim pace. McLaren have taken over again. I think indicative of the many upgrades that they've brought and the great pace they have. And I'm looking forward to unpacking some of those upgrades with you in the next segment. But any initial thoughts on what you're seeing from the qualifying sim pace?
There's not many surprises, like you say. I mean, even though McLaren are ahead, it is only ever so slightly, isn't it? Let's be honest. Mercedes, I'm not sure if that includes the floor or not, which obviously we talk about in terms of updates and what's been listed and what's not. Ferrari have got to be the big surprise, haven't they? I mean, their pace has just gone absolutely wrong completely. Since probably the Imola updates, hasn't it? It's just gone backwards. Just really gone backwards.
That was my biggest takeaway looking at this. There are three teams at the top. Ferrari have brought no upgrades and are clearly in the next step. And they're actually closest to their customer car and Haas than they are into the top three in the grid. So if there's anything we can advise to start the show is stay out of Ferrari until future notice. One other question I had for you, Terry, is this descent for Aston Martin all the way down with the back markers. And I don't think it gets any better once we get to the race sim pace. Anything you can tell us about Aston Martin?
Again, another team who haven't brought any updates this weekend at all. And to be honest, they've gone backwards, haven't they? Every time they've introduced an update, we've actually seen a step back from Aston Martin. I can't remember last time Aston Martin brought an update where they went forward, which is really strange. You expect it once or twice, but this season, I think the AMR 24, they just haven't got to grips with it at all. At any phase of the season, they've never looked like challenging for podiums like they did last season. I feel there's a lot of looking at next season now with their car and what's going on. A lot of talk about it doesn't matter. I think Fernandez said this week where we finish in the championship because the season's pretty much over for us. So that sounds very defeatist and very much a team who's looking forward to 2025 and not 2024 with a lot of work to do.
And also, I think if you look at the constructor standings, they're in a bit of no man's land where they can't quite catch the teams above them, probably
Yeah.
can't be caught by the teams below unless VCarb go on an absolute tear. So there might not be a lot of motivation for them to put a lot of effort into competing in these next few races. So interesting trend for Aston Martin. And then if we go down to the race pace, things get even closer between those top three teams, all separated by just hundredths of a second. And then very similar gap to Ferrari and Williams. You can see Aston Martin rotates even lower now with Williams approaching the bottom of the top 10. So perhaps a good omen for Alex Albon. What's your thoughts on Williams heading into this weekend? Well, I suppose just one Williams driver at this point.
Well, I mean, we will obviously touch on Logan Sargent in a bit, but there's a lot on that Williams. We're covering in the tech corner, but there's 4 or 5 updates onto the Williams in some key areas. You're talking floor, side pods. They've got a sharp fin overbite side pod now. Inlets, a lot of work they've got into that. Now they're saying it's a benchmark for 2025 in terms of bringing the car forward, but actually, it's obviously going to increase performance now, or it certainly looked like it was increasing performance, and the Sims back that up. So I think that Pat Fry's, starting to cook a bit there. We know they made all them changes. They announced it before the summer. We know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes there. So I think that Williams are looking forward to next season, but also it may help their immediate position and where they found themselves this year, because they've not made the most of the updates they've had currently, or the performance of the car really in terms of turning it into points. So I think they're a team which are looking forward, but will quite happily take some good results in the meantime on the back of it.
This could be a big momentum swing for Williams, having announced Carlos Sainz will join the team for next year, bringing a big upgrade package this week. looking ahead to Monza next week, a circuit that they typically perform well at. So this could be a nice little positive swing for the Williams team. But let's cover off the other half of that garage. For those of you that missed FP3, it was mostly missed because Logan Sargent had a massive shunt. It basically wrote off the entire car, and all signs point to him not participating in qualifying. Terry, what's the latest that you've heard about the condition of that Williams, and if, how, and when they'll be able to recover?
They put an update on their social media of getting the car back, and it looks a mess, to be honest. They were saying that they're going to look at the chassis, they're going to look at actually whether or not they need to use a spare chassis or not. I think I did a post on just before I come on air, and the problem they've got is they haven't got enough new parts to put on Logan's car. So either way, he's going to be going to an old spec car. And then I suppose, do we get a Aston Martin Singapore situation where actually they pulled Lance out of the race because they didn't have the updates to put on the car? So I suppose at the back of Williams' minds, that's still a possibility for him as well. So that Logan, he's certainly not going to hit qualifying. I'll be very, very surprised. It doesn't look at all any hope of hitting qualifying. He'll be allowed to race under the 110% rule, obviously starting from the pit lane. But I still think there's a question mark over his actual participation, because at what point does it not be financially viable? Because that car will have no data because both cars are running new parts. So they haven't even got the data of putting the old parts on the car and what it's going to run. So that's a risky business for him. And with Logan's sort of history in terms of the accidents he's had, is that just a financial gamble that Williams just don't want to make, to be honest?
And just to talk about the fantasy impact of this, if Logan doesn't participate in qualifying, which is looking like a likelihood, that'll be a -5 because he participated in the free practice session. So it'll be a non-classification in qualifying. And Ruth Buscom mentioned on F1 TV that if Williams have to replace the survival cell in the car, there's a rule that stipulates he can't participate in any of the other sessions of that day. So that could be an instant wash to make sure he doesn't participate in just the coming minutes. As for tomorrow, the starting grid is published typically 4 hours before the formation lap. If Williams can't recover the car by then, they can exclude Logan from that starting grid and he'll avoid any further penalties. He would just take a 0 for the race, -5 for the weekend. But if they are able to recover the car, he would be expected to show up if he's on that starting grid. And at that point, like Terry mentioned, he's subject to potentially getting pulled from the race or crashing out. And then you'd have a -25 on the weekend, having negatives in both events. So risky business for Logan, but on the flip side, he's also a budget enabler for a lot of really high-end teams. And I know looking across the community right now, there's a lot of reticence to pulling him out because that means you might have to move away from a triple McLaren or a Lewis Piastri build, and their upside is a little too heavy right now to potentially change Sargent. And for me, starting with a Verstappen Red Bull build going into this week, I needed to take a -10 just to get into some of these good lineups. I can't possibly take a -10 if Logan is to enter the race and DNF. We're starting to get to the point where do I take a -5, a -10, or risk a -25? I'm starting to roll the dice a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I must admit, he was a big decision looking at my lineup, that's for sure.
Terry, there's a question from Alligator in the chat about Hulkenberg, and we saw him go into the wall twice off the track in all 3 free practice sessions. Something's not right with him. Do you have any inkling on what precipitated the rough start to his weekend, and is it something that we should be afraid of as we roster him this week?
There's something clearly going on at Haas, apart from obviously people seizing stuff in the pit garage. They introduced a new front wing and also a new nose as well to that Haas. So there's clearly something up with the balance. They also made changes to the suspension. They broke the curfew last night, probably on the back of what happened yesterday in terms of the performances we're seeing, to change something with regards to the setup. So either way, it looks like those new parts are not doing what they wanted to. Now, I don't know whether or not overnight they switch back to an older setup, which obviously we've seen teams like Mercedes do as recently as Spa, where sometimes the updates just aren't doing what they want it to do. So they're just go back to what they know rather than try that way. So it could just be that that's what's happened and it's getting back to grips with it. But there is a few new parts on that one. But again, Haas haven't told us whether they're on both cars or one. So it could be that actually it's Hulkenberg only running the updates and that Kevin's running the old spec again.
That'll be interesting to see. And if my memory serves me, I think in his FP3 crash, when they brought him back to the pit, Will Buxton confirmed it was the old spec of that front wing that he damaged. So potentially still an option for him to use that new spec in the Grand Prix this weekend.
Yeah, just problem is, depends how much setup. If they broke curfew to change that setup to put it back to the old spec, to then change it for the new spec again, actually, it's a lot of work to fit in before qualifying, like you say. So I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it. I think they might have to just run with the old spec, but it's clearly not doing what they wanted to do. That's for sure.
So to bring it back to Alligator's original question, Terry, that feels to me like Hulkenberg is a riskier play this week. That Haas don't quite have the setup right. Hulkenberg doesn't have that confidence, especially into turn one where he keeps going off. So while Haas have that points and cost cap build upside, if you have the free transfers to potentially move into one of the RB drivers, or maybe even an Alpine driver this week, or even Alex Albon in that happier looking Williams, potentially that's the play for this week.
Yeah, I think Alligator says they can swap for Albon. So, without taking a sort of penalty, I would probably say that's a sensible move. I would probably look at doing that, to be honest, just to play safe. I know that obviously, Hulkenberg tends to do well, but actually it's not looking good for him currently, is it?
No, definitely isn't. Let's go over, Terry, to your Tech Corner article from this week. Feel free to just walk us through some of the most meaningful changes of the week. We're starting here with McLaren because they've brought a pretty big upgrade package, including circuit-specific things and a lot of aerodynamic improving things. Could you talk us through some of these?
Yeah, so what you find with a lot of these updates, they're actually entwined a lot. So like the front brake scoop that got changed is what's classed as the front corner. But with that, they have to change the suspension. They have to change some of the parts to go with it. So you find that they all entwine, like we just said about Haas. Actually, when you bring one, you invariably have to bring two or three because you're changing the flow of air. So this is basically just around the aerodynamic gains without compromising the cooling. So it's actually a lot bigger than what it was previously. It's a lot more structured, and it just gets air to the brakes quite a lot more, which in the current conditions will certainly help them. And then the suspension has just been changed to do it. But they've also got a floor edge, which is new. Now, the floor edges are all pretty much the same. They're designed to move that flow of air either underneath into those venturi tunnels to take it all the way to the back, or disperse it out of the way of the rear to stop any resistance to it. So all of these tweaks you see to floor edges are designed around that to just send the air the other way. My guess for that one is as they put the new parts on, that flow of air is completely changed because of obviously it's new aerodynamics at the front. So they had to do something on the edge to just take it back to where it was currently previously. Red Bull,
yeah, moving over to Red Bull, they have some interesting upgrades this week. I'm interested to see what you think about these mirror stays.
It's something they've played with quite a lot, actually. I think it's about the third time that I've seen this year from Red Bull. So they are very minor, but it's obviously all to do with the air. Now, this is more angled towards the back, how they've done this stay. So they've got stay, and they've also got very thin mirrors. I think we saw in one of the FP sessions yesterday, Max was having them tweaked and sort of messed with to get the mirrors right. So they made it a lot thinner. This is all to do with resistance. So it's all to do with just getting that air back towards the back. They've also made the engine cover smaller. So all this is designed, again, is taking that air back to the diffuser, back to the rear of the car, and it's designed to minimize any resistance to it. So it takes it away. So I think that the engine cover and the way it's done is, again, providing too much resistance. So they've gone down this route of just making these little tweaks. Some of it was for a few years ago, mainly sort of 2021, that time where we saw these little additions appearing on cars. It used to be around the sort of floor quite a lot to just take it off. They're quite technical way, but yeah, it's very minor, but then it could be very proof. Yeah, in terms of the performance of it, it looks minor, and it is in terms of cost and what it is, but actually it might make a big difference around here because this is a big downforce track. We talk about downforce levels very similar to the sort of Monaco sort of style, so it is a something they'll be looking at.
It'll be interesting to see if these little changes add up to a big gain. Obviously, McLaren have a big gaudy package this week, which leads you to believe that they'll stay at the top of the grid. Red Bull in their free practice timings, not as competitive as their rivals. So it'll be interesting to see if they can extract more performance out of the car overnight, as they so often do. Williams, you had hinted at this earlier with Alex Albon. Walk us through the first big upgrade package for Williams this year.
Yeah, so this is this lip you see where it's gone to what we call the shaft, where it's an overbite rather than an underbite. So before the air would come in at the top, and the lower part of the inlet was the bigger point. Now it's completely reversed. So you see that the bigger part is actually the top part. So it takes the air more underneath and back out. Again, all of these are designed to just take the airflow from the front to the rear. They're just clever ways of doing it. They've also done the central air intake, which is a bit just before you see the sort of T camera on there. That's a lot thinner, a lot more aerodynamic. And they've also got floor new diffuser. So like I said at the start of the show, that's a hell of a lot they've put onto that car. hell of a lot to have put into the wall, to be perfectly honest, because they
Mhm.
were running both cars with the updates, which is unusual for Williams. They normally tend to bring it to just one car, to be honest, with spares for it. But I assume that over the summer break they had enough for what they thought was spares for both cars, but obviously they didn't cater on a massive impact of what Logan's done, which you cater for a couple of front wings, but when you don't really cater for a complete rebuild, to be honest, or you certainly don't bring enough for that sometimes.
And then, Terry, you talked a bit earlier when we were discussing Nico Hulkenberg about the new front wing and nose from Haas. It looks like they haven't quite dialed these in all the way. Do you think we'll see some of those revised upgrades on the grid this weekend, or do you think they'll need another week to dial them in?
I think they've taken them off based on the conditions, because I think it's very similar to what Mercedes had in Spa, where there's not enough data, and that's the other factor. It might not be that they're not working; it might just be they just haven't got enough track time to actually get the data and the runs in that they need to dial it in. So sometimes it's not that the update hasn't worked; it's just that they can't guarantee what it's going to do to the track in terms of making the settings they need. So it's easy to go back to what you know. It's easier to use that previous historical data that you've got and go back to it sometimes and what it is, and then save it for another week. So they could just pack that up ready for next weekend, to be honest.
And then most importantly to me are the Mercedes upgrades. So they haven't listed anything for this week, but they did bring a pretty big change to Spa. They ran it in the free practice sessions. It didn't look great. They stripped it off. They had a wonderful result in the race. Now this week, they're bringing those upgrades back, and the early returns in free practice look solid. Can you tell us what Mercedes have learned, and do you think they'll look even better this week?
Yeah, so this was quite interesting. So yesterday morning during FP1, they both run different floors. So Lewis ran the old floor, which was using Spa, and then also George ran the new one. And the idea was it was literally to get that direct comparison. They confirmed that after FP2, both the new floors were on both of the new cars, so they had more than enough on that one, and they've got more than enough to cater for any sort of damage or anything like that. So they put it on both cars, and Toto confirmed last night after free practice that both cars will have the new floor going on for the weekend. So it's obviously delivered what they wanted to do. They've obviously managed to get that data. Now they didn't have it in Spa, but they've obviously managed to get it from mainly George, but also George and Lewis over FP2. And obviously the sim work they've done overnight as well makes you think that they certainly are a lot happier with it and put it in there. So yeah, both of them are running with the new floor, and it was quite a big update when it comes to Spa. So I'm expecting them to. I don't know if that pace simulation is reflected in terms of what we've seen or not, and I suppose that's probably my big question mark over those simulations. What floor setting have they been worked on? To be honest,
It's a fair point. Oh, I see Rob in the chat. Hi, Rob. We miss
hi
you.
Rob.
Hope you're having a great trip, and we look forward to seeing you back here really soon. Terry, this might be a good dovetail into our Fifth Gear Garms question for this week. For anyone who hasn't answered yet, make sure you download the FanAmp app, head on over to the Fantasy Formula base, and answer this question. Are you running Max Verstappen this week? Why or why not? So, to set the table for this, Max has won all 3 races since F1 returned to Zandvoort. This is his home race, and there is a lot of buzz around the home crowd. This Red Bull tends to be optimized for a circuit like Zandvoort. He's on a fairly new power unit. But also, when we look at a lot of the simulations and recent race performance, Mercedes and McLaren have been the top 4 drivers in the running order. So, Terry, let me ask you, as one of the teams that ran Verstappen at Spa, do you plan to run him again this week?
Yes, I do.
I want to hear more. Tell me what you
Do you
think
know
about Max
why?
this week. What are you seeing?
To be honest, I'm seeing Max, if I'm honest. I don't think it's because Red Bull have the best car. I still think that, on paper, McLaren have the best car. But I feel that with regards to Max, I just think he's got enough to put out the bag here. He will want to win this race. It's one that's going to be on his bucket list to win again this year. And I can't see too many people getting the better of him around this track. It's a track he knows, like the back of his hand. So I just feel with all of that and the Red Bull that's in the mix, I still put Max above, Lando and Oscar in terms of being able to deliver a win. That's the reason why. But I do think that McLaren have got the fast one, and I'm not too sure it's going to be straightforward. But I think with qualifying, if Max is on the first couple of rows, no engine penalties, I quite fancy him with that DRS going into turn 1 on the back of that, last banking turn. I think he will make time up there where others will lose it.
For me, I'm on a slightly different run plan than Terry this week. We both ran the Max Red Bull lineup in Spa. which across the line didn't look like the best lineup. And that George Russell disqualification really bailed us out. And so that elevated our teams. For me, I want to get back into a more traditional budget building lineup. So I'm going to pivot into some combination of McLaren and Mercedes, which we'll dive into in our next segment coming up. I think for me, it's just a little bit more about trying to spread out some of that points and cost cap build up side, and just to cover off a lot of the other fantasy analysts that are so heavily invested in those two assets now. I'm worried that if I stick out and it doesn't totally work for me, I'll be having to make a comeback both in terms of points and the cost cap. So running a slightly different run plan, but Terry, your point makes a ton of sense about Max, that this is a circuit that he thrives at, and the early returns. I think if he has one good lap in qualifying, it'll be hard to overtake him tomorrow. And that sets the table for a great weekend. So be very interesting to see how it turns out.
Yeah, interesting from Rob there that they think they might be able to get Logan's car done for qualifying, which makes you think they haven't got to change the fuel cell on it. Like you said, the survival cell, looking at that.
That would be something. And like you mentioned, Terry, all he has to do is post 107% of the qualifying time, or if it's a wet session, they wipe out the rule. So all he has to do is show up and trundle around the lap and go back in the garage and he can start P20. So fingers crossed, Logan Sargent fans.
Maybe that's the plan. Maybe the plan is to just get him out and complete a lap, and do it that way.
That would be fascinating. Let's move over now. I want to show you all the new team calculator from F1 Fantasy Tools. I had an extensive article about this when it dropped yesterday. And right now, this is public for you to play around with some of the features and get some of the look and feel, but for the full functionality, it's in a closed beta for their Patreon subscribers. That's just so they can tease out the last bugs, update all the other tools you see on the left-hand side of the page, and relaunch the site. So I'll demo not only what my team decisions are for this week, but also show you some of the features about this that I really like. The first thing that's cool is that it shows your previous lineup as a frame of reference for all of the lineups that the tool recommends for the rest of the weekend. So you can see I came into this week with Verstappen and Red Bull and had to make a lot of moves to get out of it. The tool is suggesting I take a -10 and have combinations of McLaren and Mercedes. Now, a few things here. If you click on an asset, you can now see all of the expected points based on the various scoring categories in the latest Rider Sim, as well as the expected price change. So you get a little bit more information at your fingertips. And if you right-click an asset, it gives you some quick options if you want to look at your alternatives. So you can include or exclude that driver from all of the results. Or in this case, let's change Logan if he doesn't show up here to a -5. And then what that will do is change his score the rest of the way. And you can see, is it enough to bump Sargent out of our lineups? Right now, for me, it still makes more sense to run McLaren and Mercedes, even with Sargent taking a -5 potentially. So some quick hits there on that new tool. You can also add all of the columns that the latest Rider Sim has, and it'll display it to the right here, which is really fascinating. And then also it now has built in some chip simulations if you wanted to run Limitless, or if you wanted to run the 3x DRS boost. It'll give you some options a little bit more streamlined than it did previously, which are all really fascinating upgrades. Do let me know in the chat if Ryder posted his FP3 sim and I can refresh this. But right now, my decision is a combination of, I still have the Limitless chip on. Let's fix that. There we go. A combination of Norris and Russell down here, Piastri and Russell, Hamilton and Russell, and at the top of the stack, Hamilton and Piastri. Now, Terry, I know you're very sold on Verstappen, but if you're in my shoes, do any of these combinations stick out to you?
Relies a lot on Hamilton, doesn't it?
It does.
Interestingly, obviously the man in form, isn't it? And he is someone who you'd expect. Want to visit 7 tracks? Lewis hasn't won yet, if I remember rightly. It's not.
Yes.
A successful track for Lewis at all.
Only 3 tracks on the 2024 calendar he hasn't won in, and they're all new or reintroduced tracks. It's Miami, Vegas, and Zandvoort that's only been back for 3 years. So he has the opportunity to continue his historical trend.
I saw that from Rob. I was going to mention that they're not going to do a refresh of FP3 due to lack of data. They said so. I think what we've got
F1 Fantasy Tools themselves are here. Hello. Thank you for sharing that with us. So we won't have any additional sims, but that makes sense. We didn't really learn anything from it. So let's use these here as gospel for this week.
But yeah, I would look at. I mean, I've kept Max with mine, obviously. But I think it's going to be interesting to move to. I would probably look at. See, the first couple don't have Lando in them at all, do they? Which is quite interesting. Looking down, so
I
they're
think a
saying
bit
that
of it
relies
is.
heavily on.
So
Yeah,
you just have to go a little bit farther. But also, when you look at the expensive points, we're looking at 205 up here on the Lewis teams to 204 with the Lando team. So they're basically calling it, 50-50.
yeah.
Just a matter of preference on the tier 1 driver and his expected points and price gain week to week versus having potentially 2 tier B assets and the bigger price gain and what your flavor is. I see Andrew in the chat, Leaps Frog, consistently one of the top 3 teams in the world, the number 1 team in the Fantasy Formula League. And I know, Andrew, you've been teasing the idea of switching to Hamilton, having a combination of Piastri and Russell, which is most common. If you give us any insight on what you're running this week, that could potentially sway me one way or another too. Nicola just asked news on Logan. Roughly the same. The car's in some tough shape, but Rob stuck his head in a moment ago just to say that they may have an outside chance of recovering.
Let me have a look while you're talking through those. I'll see if I can get a quick.
That sounds good. I'm going to knock out a couple of questions from the chat while
No,
Terry.
you put out the questions. I'll see if we can get a Logan update quickly.
Let's see who Terry has on speed dial that he can check in with in the Williams garage.
Yeah, where's the mute button?
Alligator's back with a question. 2 times on Piastri or Hamilton. For me, it's Hamilton, but it's very, very close. You can see in the Sims here, the difference in expected points is 0.3. So it's no better than a coin flip. Hamilton, winner of 2 of the last 3 races. Like Terry said, the ability for him to knock out another unique circuit that he's won at. I think he has slightly more upside this weekend, potentially with that new floor as well. But Piastri is not a bad shot either.
I'm not too sure. Their statement looks a bit woolly. It says, we're assessing the chassis, but it currently looks okay. We're aiming to repair and build up the chassis to be ready for qualifying. However, the amount of work to be completed, it'll be difficult, but we're going to give it everything. That sounds like they're not confident, if I'm honest. That sounds like a PR piece that he's not going to make it.
So they're starting to temper expectations for us, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the good news is the chassis is okay. That's the main thing, because that does make it easier, but there's still a lot of damage. I'm not too sure they're going to be honest. And for what it's worth, they probably, with Logan's qualifying position, would you risk getting it ready, or would you actually, sort of get it to a point where you're better to take time and get it ready for tomorrow rather than make a mistake and get, in the run up to qualifying being into such a tight turnaround?
That makes a lot of sense. And in the time it took you to update us on Sargent, Leapfrog came back and said he's leaning toward Piastri Hamilton with autopilot, which is fascinating because that will cover off some of the questions we've seen. Piastri or Hamilton is the 2X driver. Really, whichever one does better, you'll get that 2X applied to them automatically. And it makes sense because this is probably this period of the most uncertainty we're going to have all year. I think inevitably, as we get toward the end of the season through upgrades or driver form, we'll start seeing a little bit of separation. I don't recall a time where 4 drivers have been as close as they are now. So that could be a very smart way to use that chip.
Yeah,
I think
really
Alligator
cool,
just had an epiphany about the autopilot as well.
Yeah, that's a really good call.
Fantastic. Radio Paddock, great suggestion. Be sure to like this video so that we can get out in front of more fantasy strategists like yourself next week from Monza. All right. I'm going to move over now to some of the lineup reviews and see if we can knock out a few of those. And Terry, if it's a little too small, let me know. I can blow it up for you too.
I'll just rely on you reading through it. We'll be all right.
Not a problem. This is a Lando-centric build. And the big question is Ferrari or Mercedes? No doubt about it. Mercedes. Yes. Ferrari have brought nothing to the grid. That's new this week. They are noticeably behind in the sims and on the timetables.
It might be worth remembering that Ferrari may come into play next week, though. So,
at a home race, I imagine they're probably saving.
A lot of updates due. So, yeah, it's certainly one to keep at the back of your mind.
Fair play. This next lineup for Arcon is Piastri and Russell versus Piastri and Hamilton. Oh, yeah, I'd go with Lewis for option 1 on this one. I don't mind Russell. I think he's had a string of very bad luck. You look back at the British Grand Prix, he had the water system issue. He DNF'd. In Hungary, he had the difficult run in Q1. It was a little too early on an evolving track that was drying off, so he was out in Q1. Last race, first across the line disqualification. Then at this circuit last year, he had light contact with Lando Norris, suffered a puncture and dropped to P17. So Russell's due for some good luck, and this could be the week that it happens. So I don't hate Russell either.
No, I think they're both good options, aren't they? I don't think there's going to be a lot in it, to be honest, looking at it. Like I say, qualifying could be key to that plan in terms of which one you pick Mercedes-wise. But then you could argue the same with McLaren, couldn't you, and Lando and Oscar, to be honest.
That's fair. And looking at the bottom of this team, though, you do have Logan Sargent and Hulkenberg, who's looked really out of sorts this weekend. So potentially, if you have only one transfer that you've used from Russell to Hamilton, you may want to consider an alternative for Nico.
Yeah.
All right. El Potato. What a great name. Best way to get Sargent out of my team before qualifying. So at this point, I think the only way you get Sargent out of your team is if you drop Tsunoda down to a Sauber driver, or you take the really big hit and downgrade Russell to, like an Alonso or something. But for me, I would just take the -5 with Sargent. I think he'll survive on a dry circuit. I think someone in the track earlier on the chat had mentioned that Logan Sargent has only crashed on wet circuits. It's going to be dry tomorrow. So
yeah,
if he lines up, I think he'll be a safe bet to just trundle around in P20 and survive the weekend and not write off any more cars. So a -5 versus potentially much more than that if you move from those top two drivers is my recommendation. All right. Bobby is Racing has a couple of Russell Piastri lineups versus a Norris Russell lineup. For me, Terry, I think with all other positions being the same here, I think one of them has Albon for Sargent. So your options, I'd say, are staying with the same team, Russell Piastri, no Sargent, or Norris Russell with Sargent. It's a close one for me. I think Sargent and Norris could be okay.
Would you just keep it and save it?
Or roll your 3 free transfers into Monza?
Yeah. Knowing that if a team's not brought an update this weekend, they're coming next weekend after summer break. So, Aston Martin will be due one, Ferrari will be due one. So actually, it might be a good time to roll it if there's not a lot, between picking two teams like that.
I think we can firmly rule out the one in the middle where you have the lesser of the two McLaren drivers and Sargent. So I would bookend it. Albon with the upside with Piastri on the left is probably a good play too. Norris isn't a bad shot on the right, but I like the cost cap gain upside of your original team as well.
Definitely.
Jeremy, thanks for sending your team again, Jeremy. So currently running triple McLaren with 2 back markers, looking to move to potentially Norris Russell or Piastri Russell to cover off any risk with the McLaren drivers. This is a close one for me. I like the middle team.
Yeah.
Norris slightly over Piastri for me. Albon slightly over K-Mag or most other C-tier drivers this week.
I think the middle one for me, looking at it.
Agreed. All right, moving on to Sim on the pace. It looks like you're looking at -10s just like I am. Piastri Russell, Piastri Hamilton, Norris Russell. So these are the questions of the week. It looks like your last 2 options have double Williams versus the first option that has Tsunoda Williams, or the lesser of the 2 Williams.
Not sure I'll move into double Williams at the moment, if I'm honest.
I think potentially just roll that team back. I think a lot of people from a budget perspective are going to have to use that first team. And so even if you're uncertain about this week, you're just covering off what the masses are doing. And to put this in perspective, when the provisional scores came out, my team with Verstappen and Red Bull was 9,800 or so in the global rankings. Once they updated it to subtract those points from Georgia Mercedes, I went all the way back to 6,600. So that means in the top 10,000 teams, at least a third of them are running a combination of Russell and Mercedes. So it looks like you're really moving with the masses with that first lineup. All right, Leapsfrog, here he is. I should have just covered this off first. It looks like he said it'll either be Hamilton or Norris in that slot. He's since confirmed that it'll be Hamilton, leaning Hamilton, also Hamilton autopilot on the table. So I definitely want to keep in touch with you, Andrew, over the next 20 minutes or so to see if that autopilot comes on for you, because I may make a last minute chip movement myself on this. You may inspire me. All right, just 2 more lineups left in this first wave, and then we can jump back into the chat. Well, looks like Arcon has come back with some updates here. I'm still thinking, okay, so it looks like trying to get out of Sargent with a double Sauber. And we saw in the Sims a Sauber look absolutely dreadful. I'm thinking option 1, potentially. Like Hulkenberg's looking rough, but not so rough that I wouldn't run Hamilton this week. But that's potentially me being a Lewis homer myself. Terry, what do you think?
I'd probably say not option 2. I think it's definitely the original or option 1 for sure. I'm not sure bringing in, is it bringing in Lewis like you do in option 1 is enough of a move for me in terms of, you've obviously got Valtteri as well coming into there. I think I'll probably say with the original one.
It's a pretty good shout too, because the other lineup is Russell and Sonoda in a V carb that is consistently challenging for points. All you need are a couple of points gained on a low overtake circuit, and you could see another price gain too. So not a bad shout.
Yeah.
MP3H, should I use the autopilot? Well, you heard from one of the top 3 teams in the world that autopilot is on the table this week when you have a lineup like yours. So I would say it is on the table, and I would be happy to use it if I were you. Fantastic. Well, I'll leave the team calculator up here in case anyone wants to reference it as they're setting their lineups. Terry, let's head back into the chat.
Wow. What have we got? Where are you?
Let's see. The timestamp for me is about 27 minutes past the hour. I know it's a different hour for you. Hulk and Gasly or Sonoda and a Sauber? Ooh, interesting.
Ooh. Normally I'd say Hulk and Gasly, but the way Hulk's been performing,
yeah,
I'm not sure that Alpine have got enough to make up for if Hulkenberg has a poor performance, if I'm honest. So I might be tempted to switch that one.
I'm thinking go with Sonoda. And a track like this where overtakes are hard to come by, I will just go with the best driver in the situation, which for me would be Yuki.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Also, just a friendly reminder from our friends at FanApp, make sure to submit your lineups and the answer to our contest question. You'll have a chance to win some great prizes there. Claudio wants to know Hamilton, Piastri, Sargent versus Russell, Piastri, Sonoda. So basically Hamilton, Sargent versus Russell, Sonoda.
I'd probably switch that one.
I would switch that one too. Now that Sargent is looking likely like a -5, you're trying to figure out, is the difference between Hamilton and Russell more than 5? Not really. So I think that upside is there.
Yeah, definitely.
And, Andrew brings up a great point in the chat. Some folks have been asking him, why not save autopilot for a sprint race? And he's saying, well, I have the 3x DRS boost and no negative. There are only 3 sprints left. So I'm just running out of times to use these chips. And of those chips that you could have left over, autopilot makes the most sense to use on a non-sprint weekend. And also, first session back from the summer break, no FP3, you just know less. And so when you're uncertain, some of these buffering chips like no negative or autopilot can save us there.
And there's the weather, isn't there? I mean, if we've got a dry day tomorrow, we haven't had a huge amount of dry running at all over the sessions that we have had as well. So even that in itself can pose a completely different setup for tomorrow.
Absolutely. Kalula311 asks Sonoda or Magnussen? Give me Yuki.
Yeah.
2x on Russell or Piastri?
Piastri.
Yeah, Piastri, but it's close.
Yeah. I would say I don't think you can go much wrong with either one, but my gut would be Piastri.
Michael's wondering where Rob is. Rob is on vacation in Europe for a little stretch here, so he sends his regards. He couldn't make the live stream today. He was in the chat earlier. he and I are going to be filming our Monza preview later this week. And then we'll probably have another guest on, either Terry or another fantasy creator in this space for the live show next week, because Rob will be flying home. But then we'll be back to our normal programming with Rob in the seat with me.
Yeah, Rob took a summer break after the summer break.
He did. That's good. I needed a little extra breather too.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I'm already
Good
looking
idea.
forward to, there's another sort of fall break between Singapore
yeah.
and Coda. So another 3 or 4 week gap where we
Yeah,
can
it's like
analyze some
a
more.
3-week gap, isn't it? So back to back and then 3-week gaps. The modern F1 calendar.
Andrew has just confirmed that he's used the autopilot chip for anybody keeping track at home.
Gone all in.
Hassan asks, is wildcard a good option here? So wildcard to me will depend on how many -10s you're taking. As a general rule of thumb, if you're taking at least 2, it's in play. If you're taking 3, it's an automatic. So it depends on, are you wildly changing your team? I think when I used mine, I made 6 transfers out of 7 lineup positions. So trying to get the most bang for your buck there.
Yeah, I used mine beginning of the season. I think it was like a -80. I think it was going into China, so it made perfect sense to use it then. But if it's a couple, it's probably worth keeping it potentially. But any more than that, yeah, with the way the standings are, I think you gotta use it.
Prasanjit says he's from California and can barely open his eyes at his moment, and then saw the Hulk and Sargent news. I woke up at 5:30 Eastern time to watch basically no free practice, and I was joking with Terry off screen that they spent a majority of the session talking about which Max Verstappen song they like the best. So it's a tough time to wake up early.
You're not going to sing it?
No, not in public. I sang it to you once in private, and that was already too much. Jeffrey wants to know Nico or Albon. I think we're agreed on Albon here.
Yeah.
Is Hamilton and Piastri worth a -10 versus Norris and Russell without?
I'm not sure it is.
Same. Yeah, especially when you see the sims on screen here, everybody separated by 3 points. Not worth
Yeah,
it.
I'm not sure it's worth a minus. I think if you can get to it, it might be worth it, but I'm not sure it's worth a minus.
Good. Sargent or Zhou? If you have the free transfer, this is the 1 in a million where I'd probably go with Zhou. Sargent now, 75-25 in my opinion for a -5. Zhou is at least starting the race and starting qualifying.
Yeah. I just saw what should happen for Adam to sing live on stream.
Oh no.
I'm checking Logan while we're reading through these.
Fantastic. I'll run ahead with a few. So Elise wants to know what should happen for Adam to sing live on stream. I'm open to suggestions in the chat if you have any.
F1 Fantasy have updated about Logan Sargent, saying that he's unlikely to participate in qualifying following a crash. So I'll say if F1 Fantasy are updating that, then the chances are pretty remote for a start.
Yeah, that is a clever reminder to everybody about the -5.
Yeah.
We're showing up.
Oh,
Gazelle just said, should I take out Sargent or not? It really depends. Yes. If you have the budget to have a good team with a Sauber driver, I would do it. If you're in the situation that I'm in, that you see on screen here, that means I would probably stick with those high-end drivers and take the beating on Sargent. Hope he runs tomorrow and just survives the race. I can tell you already that's what I'm leaning toward. Terry, let's take a moment and share our lineups. So I have locked in my team already, and it looks like this. So I'm sticking with Logan. I am bringing in Lewis as my 2X driver and rolling with Oscar Piastri. And for me, I can run this lineup with just a little bit more budget than some of my competitors. And so I want that edge in a pretty safe lineup. But what I think I'm going to do live is Andrew just convinced me to run the wildcard chip. And now I just need to find it. And then I'm going to run that
even.
Oh, look at this. Logan Sargent, unlikely to participate.
Yeah, that's what they were saying. So
a big bar. Very interesting. All right, everybody. You're seeing it live. Autopilot is in. So I'll flash my team up here one more time for everyone to take a quick look at it. Terry, any changes to your team from what you had told us a moment ago?
Well, I've got Max Hulkenberg, Bottas, Joe, Yuki, Mercedes, McLaren, because I didn't take a minus. I moved out of obviously Red Bull for Mercedes, and then I also moved out of Logan as well. So it's do I take a minus and take out one of the Sauber ones, or even Hulkenberg, or do I just stick to what I got? So I'm caught between them at the moment, to be honest. But I think I'm going to stick with it and ride it out and hope that Hulkenberg comes good with the new setup that they've got on it.
All right, let's fire off a few more questions before we get into our contest. Maslin wants to know, can Ford Hamilton and Norris, is it a better option than Hamilton and Piastri? For points, yes. For cost cap gain, no. So to me, it depends on what you want to do next. If you are this close to that next lineup tier, run Hamilton and Piastri. If you're just going for raw points to try to catch up in your league, I'd say Hamilton, Norris. Big Man wants to know, is Gasly a good replacement for Sargent? Absolutely. He's not guaranteed to get a -5. Terry, could you say your lineup one more time? I think the chat was trying to keep up with everything I was saying and everything you were.
Oh, sorry. I've got Max Hulkenberg, Bottas, Joe, Yuki, and then I've got Mercedes and McLaren.
All right.
I need to start submitting them, really, don't I? Let's be honest about it. I need to get better at that.
Yes, submit it through our fan
through the base. I mean, if ever there was a plug there it is, live on air. Remember to submit it through the base so you don't have to read it off your
shameless plug
on a live chat yet.
Hulkenberg or Sonoda, Simon? I'd say Sonoda. Gasly or Sonoda? Probably Sonoda.
I'd probably say Sonoda.
Alpine, they had this look for a few races where I thought they were doing a bit better, but now they need to prove it to me again. They've been just a little bit out of sorts for a few races. Gasly or Albon? Now we're getting close. Let's see. Let's rely on the team calculator for a second here. Just see what they say.
Just while you look at that, just to answer William's question, Haas are having setup problems. That's what's up with Hulkenberg. So we're not sure if they've mastered it or not. They made a lot of changes to it. So it's putting a bit of a question mark over him.
Gasly or Albon, you can see it's a close call. 0.5 points off between the two. I like the buzz around Albon, and you'll probably have him in your lineups in that spot for Monza because I think they'll do a little bit better than Alpine next week. So give me Albon.
Yeah, and these updates do look good, actually. They look a lot more solid on the car. Williams have looked quite happy with it, to be honest. And if you look at the sims as well, they seem to reflect that.
Clayton wants to know Hamilton or Piastri for the 2X. I have Hamilton. I think a few others are running Hamilton as their 2X2, but this is also a good week for the autopilot. I've locked it in, and Leapfrog, one of the top 3 teams in the world, has done it as well. Thanks for the kind words, Alligator. Enjoy qualifying. Let's see. I think we've covered out most of the questions, but if we haven't gotten to yours yet, feel free to
remind you if we run that time there.
We've got 12 good minutes until we have to jump. Henry wants to know Hulk and Joe or Albon and Bottas.
I think it's close. Because if Hulk does get to grips with the setup, then he's normally good for some points. His performances have been quite good, despite what we've been saying this week.
It's very close.
It's
part
close.
Part of what makes it close to me is I would rather have Hulk on the long term after this. So it sort of depends on the rest of your team. You don't want to spend your 2 Monza free transfers moving around these bottom pieces.
Yeah.
So I would be tempted to either stick with it. It's very, very close. I don't think there's a wrong answer there.
Yeah, and I think Hulk is going to do better in obviously Monza next week as well than what certainly what Albon I think might do as well. So that might be a bit of factor as well.
Gasly or Hulk? You can see tied exactly with 4.9 expected points out here on your screen. Probably Gasly, but also another no wrong answer sort of question. And Lucathon basically just covered off that same sentiment, is that Haas has the higher upside, but Hulkenberg has lurked pretty awful through the free practice sessions. The only solace here is it looks like it's drying up at Zandvoort now, and we know with some certainty that it'll be dry tomorrow. So hopefully better days are ahead. Vishnu wants to know, I have Norris and Piastri. Should I get one of the Merc drivers? To me, getting one of the Merc drivers will just diversify some of your risk a little bit. Like we mentioned earlier in the show, we're coming out of the summer break. We didn't have a lot of data from free practice. So it's not certain that Mercedes or McLaren are the fastest team. And to cover off that risk, you could split it up. But I would also say there's nothing wrong with triple McLaren, because there's definitely been the team of form recently. So it's just a matter of preference and how you move into them. Tommy Two Fish says, I can save my 3 free transfers and run Norris and Hamilton, but I'll have Zhou, Bottas, and Sargent. That's tricky, because conventional wisdom for me is that I don't move up into the next tier of lineups until I have to run. Basically, I don't want to run 3 back markers to move up in my lineup. So in your position, Tommy, I'd consider maybe moving out of Norris into a lesser driver, bumping one of the Sauber drivers probably into an Albon or maybe an RB driver if you can afford them, and then try to build your cost cap to really earn Norris and Hamilton without having to run so much risk. V28 says, any chips recommended? I am personally running autopilot. I don't recommend any other chips, except if you really want to make a lot of changes. If you had a Red Bull heavy team for Spa, wildcard could be a way to avoid some negative points if you really want to flip your team over. Let's go ahead now and run our contest.
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah. All right, everybody's on the wheel. Let's give it a spin. Ooh, Silent Sinner. I like it. Sounds like a band I listened to in high school or something. Congratulations. We'll be in touch with you to get you your 5th Gear Garms gift card. And thank you again for playing. Slide this over. Let's see. I'll slide it back over to my team for a little bit if anyone has questions about what I'm running. If any of you are just joining and want a quick rundown of everything.
Question there from Clayton. Does your 3rd transfer carry over?
Here's what happens. If you have one unused transfer, it will carry over to the next week. If you have multiple unused transfers, only one transfer will carry over. Taylor wants to know, would I take a -20 to get Piastri Russell, or run just Piastri for this week? I suppose it would depend on the rest of your lineup, Taylor. Are you running a Piastri with a bunch of tier C drivers, and then you'd be moving to Russell from one of those to get a -20? I'd like to see your lineup a little bit more, because on the surface, I never like to take a -20, but for the right reason, I could be convinced. Jeremy wants to know, triple McLaren with Sargent or Norris, Russell, Albon? I like diversifying the risk with Norris, Russell, and obviously Albon over Sargent. We know that's at least 5 points of benefit, which is the difference between, let's see, Piastri and Russell in this example, I think, if I'm reading this right. So I would go with the second lineup, Norris, Russell, Albon. Sponge asking the question we all want to know, Terry, will Sargent be part of quali? We know.
That's what I would say. Just checking.
Just checking. We can see here, Sponge, this update on the official F1 fantasy game. It's not looking good. All signs point to it not looking good. So I would assume a -5 for non-classifying in quali. Clayton, yes. If you had 3, only use 2, you'll carry over a 3rd into next week. And something that's important here, if you had 3 and use a chip such as Limitless or Wildcard that gives you some transfer benefit, you will lose that carryover transfer into the week after that. Kieran wants to know Hamilton and Piastri versus Piastri and Russell and taking a -10 to go from Sargent to Bottas. No, I'd keep Hamilton, Piastri, and Sargent and take your beating. And that's what I'm doing on my team. So I put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah, there's no update, but I don't think he's going to make it looking at it.
Did Hulk get a penalty? Not that I'm aware of.
No, I've not seen any penalties. A lot of drivers were given, a lot of teams were given fines, I should say. A lot of that went into yesterday. So a lot around unsafe releases, and there was a couple of speed incidents as well. Williams and Haas both got fined, but the drivers didn't get any penalties, which is normally the case in practice. It normally goes to the teams rather than drivers. It's only really qualifying onwards the drivers get penalised for things. Before that, the teams tend to take the brunt of it.
Would you say there's a chance, Terry, that Hulkenberg could start at the back of the grid or in the pit lane if Haas want to change the setup radically overnight?
I think it would depend where he qualifies. If he has a poor qualifying, then it certainly might be an option for him again. But I think anything would have made last night, because that's what they broke the curfew, and going into obviously qualifying, they still got that window before part permit kicks in. So I think they've obviously got the data from Kevin's car as well. So I think they'd be pretty set up in terms of what they want to run on it. It might just be a case of just changing the brakes over. Could be something simple like that, which can be done before qualifying. But I think it's like anything. If you've got a team which qualifies, 17th, 16th, 17th downwards, sometimes with the wet to dry situation we're going to find ourselves in, it might actually be worth making some major changes, starting from the pit lane based on that as well.
Tommy Two Fish, I've got you covered with this sim. I just plugged your team in situation here, and with just a few minutes left, I would default straight to that. Go Hamilton, Piastri with Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, Sargent. Henry, Tsunoda, Sargent, or Albon, Bottas? Ooh, how much do we like Yuki is what he's asking.
More than what Christian does.
Yes, more than what Christian does. Leaning slightly toward Albon, Bottas, because you're going to get the -5 from Sargent on a low overtake circuit. Tsunoda's upside isn't drastically bigger than Albon. If Tsunoda ends up in the points, it'll only be 1 or 2 points for P9 or P10. So I don't think the difference is that significant. Plus, you cover off the risk of Sargent. All right, everybody, we've got 3 minutes left. Let's make sure we get those lineups in. Now I'm nervous.
Wow, they still think they might get Logan's car done. That is monumental if they have.
They technically have 3 minutes plus 15. He just has to get out in Q1.
They're still working on it. They certainly haven't given up. The latest pictures are, the covers are off the cars there. So
thank you for the kind words, Taylor. I appreciate it. Hassan wants to know Hamilton, Piastri, Hulkenberg, Bottas, Sargent. Okay, versus Piastri, Russell, Albon, Gasly, Bottas with wild card. Ooh, if you have wild card, that's not a crazy shout this week. Is get the team totally right, get out of the risk of Hulkenberg and Sargent. You have a pretty good build looking forward to Monza. That's not a bad use of it.
What did Alan say very quickly? What do you think of Hamilton, Yuki, Piastri, Bottas, Gasly, Merck, and McLaren? I think it's a pretty solid lineup.
I'm happy with that. You avoid, like in the previous example, you avoid Hulkenberg and Sargent. That's wonderful.
I would go with that, especially with 2 minutes to go. I wouldn't be messing too much with that now.
Terry, any final thoughts before we get ready for qualifying?
No, just thank you for having me on for the whole show. I must admit, it's a lot harder to keep up to date with stuff while you're live on stream. But no, I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, as always.
And Terry, thank you for joining. It's always great having you on the team, and this is a really fun episode for me too. Hope you all enjoyed it. We'll be back with our Monza preview. It's going to be 1 day later because we're adjusting to Rob's time zones in Europe and my work schedule. So don't worry if you see it on Wednesday, but we'll be back in the saddle right here from Monza for you next week. Enjoy the race.